Salutations, gentle viewers, this is George from Ireland. This video is a debate about whether we ought to abolish private schools. I know in the United Kingdom they're usually called private schools, but usually known as public schools, but there we are. I'll say private schools, it would be more universally understood. Okay, so first of all, I've got to start out as the proposition. Right, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this House must abolish private schools for a number of reasons. First of all, they confer an unfair and unearned advantage on a small minority of people. Second of all, it's bad for even the pupils who attend those schools. Third of all, the state has a duty and a right to control all education, and that's what the state must not be negligent in this duty. And lastly, because it will have better outcomes for society. But let me get back to the unfairness point. Well, why do parents pay through the nose for these schools, right? It's because they get smaller class sizes, they have better facilities, Olympic-sized swimming pools, indoor pools, outdoor pools, fantastic gymnasia, art departments, sports departments. I mean, all that's wonderful, but ideally, these blessings would be shared with the whole of society. There's this maldistribution of resources, which leads to grossly unequal outcomes. I accept unequal outcomes. Of course, we're going to have unequal outcomes. But if we have grossly unequal opportunities, then the outcomes will be skewed even more. So it's divisive as society. It pits people against each other. It makes people incredibly conceited, and they harbour a sense of disdain for those who are less fortunate. And you might have people on the other side saying, oh no, it doesn't confer an unfair advantage. Well, the schools certainly believe it does. They say so in their bump. Read the prospectuses they send out, all right? Because we're going to get better grades. Value added, they call it. You take two pupils of the same intellectual aptitude, you give one of them this superb schooling, one of them doesn't. No prizes for guessing who's going to get better results. And this is confirmed because then at the university, those who beat the state schools, they outperform their private school peers who've had the same results in A-levels and GCSEs. Now, you'll probably hear from the other side of the House, oh yes, but we provide scholarships. Well, this really is risible. Remember Dr. Anderson, long-serving headmaster of Eton, he claimed that Eton was doing a public good because it handed out a few scholarships, right? These scholarships for Eton in particular, you could only pass if you've been to about half a dozen prep schools, all right? Some of the priciest prep schools in the country. And even the people who win them, they're never actually poor. They're all middle class. They're just maybe not upper middle class. Some of the scholarships are worth a measly 10%. You know, 10% of 40,000 quid a year. That's not going to make a big difference between those who can make it or not. It just slightly reduces the financial pain for an already very affluent family. And so it gets thickos into university. Privilege. I taught at some of these schools. There was a dreadful one called Ampleforth, and some of my pupils who were really academically substandard, at the age of 18, they couldn't even write a single sentence without making at least a few mistakes. And shockingly, they'd go on to university and be awarded degrees because, you know, we're upper middle class, we go on to tertiary education, we don't enter the job market at 18, oh no, not us. Despite having no aptitude for scholarly learning, and that's that. And obviously they should have gone to an ordinary school, left school at 18, or actually ideally 16, and got a job straight away. So this class divide is also a racial divide, and it's a religious divide, and we know that there's been a great deal of child abuse going on at these schools. So they are dreadful. We must have done with them. Right, the schools can still exist, but there'll be state schools. They can be selective state schools for those who are going to benefit most of them, the hardest working and the brainiest ones. Now, let me continue about how it's so bad for the pupils who attend these schools. So it's not a microcosm of society, it's a very narrow social set. And they come out with this ugly streak of contempt for the rest of society, calling them plebs and proles and chavs and all the rest of it. Snobbery is revolting. It's obviously allied to racialism. So it's just nauseating that this tiny minority lording over the rest of us should feel this sense of entitlement. And then you can see how in government they wreak havoc on the needy. So it's completely unreal. They're stuck in this ivory tower, this time warp from the Middle Ages or something. It's a medieval farce. And so we must do away with it. So I remember boys who've been to Eton saying to me, by the age of 18, they'd never had a conversation with a working class person. They'd exchanged words, but they'd not actually conversed, which is a shocking indictment of the current state of affairs. The state has the prerogative to control education. all education. Every child should have the same education. Obviously, you can have some choices, choose more of this subject and more of that. But we mustn't have parents hiving off their pupils and putting them in this elite set, social elite, financial elite, the non-academically elite, and giving them a very unreal view of the world, and building up this privilege and pitting people against each other. It's a recipe for class warfare. It was aimed for equality, right? This is an egalitarian era, and the days of this unfair privilege are long since over. They should be done away with. It has no place in a 21st century society. You look at countries like Denmark or Finland, which don't have this sort of thing, and what it does is it raises the standard of state education. These superb teachers in places like Eton, they would work in the state sector, they would teach the ablest pupils, and the resources could be distributed much more equitably, and that would be better outcomes for everyone. I beg to propose. So now, I am the opposition. So, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the House, we say no to this ghastly motion for a number of reasons. We have to think of the rights of pupils and parents. Second of all, because these independent schools provide better education. Let's just call them independent. They are independent of the state. We don't have to say private. Third of all, because there's freedom of association. People don't always want to get mixed, and they might get bullied. Okay, if you have a pucker accent, if your parents have a few pennies to rub together, that sort of thing, you might be mercilessly bullied in a state school. That's to say, a government-funded school. And lastly, because we can't get away from a financial advantage. Having more money is always going to benefit you. Having parents who do more for you, yes, it's going to benefit you. Parents love their children, all right? It's not a crime to do the best for your children. I remember one of my colleagues, a real left-winger, he was a massive hypocrite, soi-disant, as he taught in independent schools, saying, Tony Blair, look at him, and he couldn't send his children to independent schools because he was a Labour politician, sent them to a selective state school, breaking Labour's policy. Do as I say, not as I do. That was a Conservative mantra when they exposed the flagrant hypocrisy of Blair, of Harriet Harman for doing that. Diane Abbott, this tribune of the ultra-left, sent her son to a fee-paying school. Now, however much you may execrate them for what they did, on the other hand, you can't blame them for doing the best thing for their children. What else should a parent do? If you could help your child, wouldn't you do it? And if you wouldn't, then you're neglectful of your parental duty. Surely the well-being of your child must come before some abstract ideological fad. All right, so let's go back to the rights of pupils and parents. We want a free country or not? And if we do have a free country, we must allow parents to make the choices they wish to for their children within reason. We're not talking about allowing them to abuse their children or something. Say no to totalitarianism. The nanny doesn't always know best. We don't want the state interfering in every facet of our lives and bossing us around. Say no to this overweening state control. The overbearing state should back off. And so if people want to have an independent school, that must be allowed. What's wrong with a little independence, a little space of autonomy where people can do things a bit differently? Obviously, there are fundamental laws that these independent schools have to obey, and they're subjected to many inspections as it is. And independent schools, they do a lot for nearby state schools. They have partnerships with them, they help them out. And there are many bursaries and scholarships. Like at Eton, for example, at least 20% of boys are on some sort of bursary, and this goes even up to 100%. And the headmaster of Eton but one, Tony Little, and he said, his father was a baggage handler at Heathrow Airport. He's working class as it comes, and he's the first male in his family to be educated beyond the age of 14. So the idea that they're all toffee noses from blue blood and broad acres really is daft. It's a myth and a pernicious one at that. So stop propagating this. We've had enough of your class warfare, all right? And these independent schools, they're increasingly ethnically mixed. They bring in a huge amount of money from overseas. A lot of people from Nigeria and China and so forth are coming to the United Kingdom in particular, bringing money in, making it cosmopolitan, and it's a wonderful melange of ethnicities and languages. And that is the future, building relationships and exerting soft power, benign influence around the world. So, and what about the rights of the teachers? If they want to teach in an independent school, they should be allowed to do so. And no, they're not going to teach in a rough comprehensive where they're going to be spat at and beaten up every day. They're just going to leave teaching and do something else. All right, so that's that. I know there's some severe problems in the state sector, but that's not the fault of the independent sector. Surely the solution is to resolve these issues in the state sector and not to vandalise the independent sector. And the Labour government in the mid-60s, they plotted to outlaw these independent schools. Well, what happened is Eton was simply going to locate itself, the Republic of Ireland or to France. They hadn't made their mind up. Anyway, push did not come to shove. So, as I say, freedom of association. You should be allowed to mix with whomsoever you wish to mix with. And ethnic and religious minorities often set up schools to suit their culture and identity. The Sikh independent schools, Jewish independent schools, Muslim independent schools, you name it. The different Christian denominations, Catholic, Anglican, Methodist, and so forth, founded schools to suit their ethos. And what's wrong with that? You get the same in the state sector. So you can have smaller class sizes. Yes, you can have better facilities. And these independent schools can let the community use them a bit more in terms of the theatre, the swimming pool, especially outside of term time, the gym. They already do that a great deal. And they donate to charity. These schools are charities in themselves. And they're often raising funds for schools in needier parts of the world. But supposing the proposition had their way and they did away with these independent schools, what then? How are you going to stop private tutoring? Or you can outlaw it. It's still going to happen. South Korea's outlawed hagwons a century ago. They still happen on an absolutely huge scale. The law is in abeyance. It's made a mockery of on a daily basis. How are you going to police that? What, are you going to go to jail for teaching someone? I mean, for goodness sake. If the parents want it, the child wants it, the tutor wants it, what's the harm? Who's the victim here? They're being paid. Society is the victim. Come on, it's a victimless crime. Teaching someone is not a crime. Loving your children is not a crime. It's the most natural thing in the world. And even if you didn't have private tutors, parents could be teaching them extra lessons at home, helping them, or sisters or brothers or family, friends, even if no money changes hands. There are online lessons. They can be doing it on Skype. Some people have got more books in the house. They've been read to. They have erudite parents. So, yeah, I mean, the family backgrounds are not equal. And we can't socially engineer our way out of that. Anyway, look at the state sector. Even if you did what you wanted to, people would just go to the knobby state schools. Holland Park Comprehensive, Viscount Stansgate, who masqueraded as Tony Benn. He sent his children there. A lot of these socialist politicians, champagne socialists, would do this sort of thing. They say, oh, I'm so selfless, I won't have them go to independent school. That's more money for them, and they still send their child to a very selective state school. And obviously they're not always good independent schools, and state schools are not always bad, by no means. So you just have it selected on the basis of postcode, of living in a more affluent area. And of course, rich people aren't necessarily cleverer, but generally they are. If you simply look at the wealth of the area and the results in the schools and the sort of teachers who want to be in these schools and that kind of thing, it's not hard to figure out. There's a correlation there. It's not predestination, but it is more likely to get better results in a more shishi area. That's no mystery. So we're never going to get away from that. And we could do lots of things to sort out the state sector, bring back grammar schools for high ability pupils who are from middling and low income families, and on and on. We could require independent schools to grant a greater number of scholarships, a high proportion of scholarships, things of that nature. But to actually demolish the whole system would be an outrageous act of cultural and educational vandalism and wouldn't have achieved any of the outcomes that the other side feign to achieve. So for the foregoing reasons, I'm going to plead with the House to reject this scurrilous motion, because we are saying a very firm no to totalitarianism, because we are preserving institutions of world renown, because we uphold the right of people to associate freely, and lastly, because independent education, formally, informally, is impossible to abolish. I beg to oppose.